And we're going to welcome Dr. Rose. He is the ID&T professor at West Texas A&M University, and that's actually where I got my master's degree. He was my advisor there and the head of the program, so he's got some wonderful tips for facilitating an online course. And if you've been on here, you've probably heard he's really one of the first reasons that I wanted to teach online courses. So we're going to welcome him, and he's got the questions that you guys put in the Google Sheet, and he's going to kind of go over some, and then we've got some backup questions. But we're planning to end right at 8 because I know you guys have some other things going on as well. So we'll just let him kind of fill us in on his expertise.
Okay, pleasure to meet you all. And I guess the idea is that I will be both reading the question and then answering it, or will individuals be asking the questions?
Because they put it into the sheet, if you don't mind going ahead and reading, because I know you could kind of go through your notes better, and that way we don't have the...
Okay, sounds good. Well, this is the first thing it's important to learn. If you have a gig, prepare. I could probably wing these questions pretty convincingly since I've been dealing in this environment for many years. But you don't want to do that. You want to nail down exactly where you're going to go. And that's almost more important online than it is in the classroom. Because in the classroom, you have immediate feedback. You can see what's working and what's not working in the classroom. But you can't do that online. You're just sending it out into the ether most of the time, particularly when you're doing asynchronous online, where people are taking the course at a different time than you're giving it. They're catching at a different time than you're pitching. So you're throwing your stuff out into a black hole, all right? Which means that you're getting no immediate feedback, and you're going to have very tightly organized stuff in order to optimize your chance of hitting the target. You can't do the course correction that you can do in an online or in a synchronous or an in-person environment. Tell you just a little bit about me so you'll know where these answers are coming from. I was an elementary school teacher for 6 years in Saratoga Springs, New York, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And then I had an entire corporate career. I was a senior instructional designer for Microsoft Corporation for 6 years, and also for Boeing Aircraft, helping to write pilot training for the Boeing 737 and 747. I don't know anything about airplanes. I always worked with a subject matter expert. And then I got tired of the corporate life, or perhaps the corporate life got tired of me. And I moved over 10 years ago to West Texas A&M, where I'm currently the program director for the master's degree in instructional design and technology. Now, we don't really specialize in elementary and secondary education here. What we do in my program is we take ex-school teachers, people who used to be school teachers, but for some reason decide not to do it anymore, and we retrain them in technology to become computer trainers in business, industry, government, nonprofit, and higher education. So we deal with the people who still want to be teachers, but they're tired of buttoning jackets and wiping runny noses, okay? Or for other reasons, they've just decided elementary and secondary is not for them. And we've had pretty good success. About 650 people have gone through the program in the last 10 years, of whom soon-to-be Dr. Ward is one of them. Okay, so that's kind of who I am. So let's go straight to these questions. How does your teaching style differ from traditional face-to-face when you're doing online? Well, the most important thing is that everything has to be in place on your first day. You don't do what you do in a normal classroom, which is see how it goes on the first day and decide that night what you're going to do on the second day. Okay, that's not going to work. You want your students to have every advantage of an online environment. And one of those advantages, and again, we're talking asynchronous here, where you're putting it out there and they're using it anytime they want. One of the advantages is for them to be self-paced. And they can't be self-paced unless they see the entire picture. So on day one of every one of my classes, every study guide, every lecture demonstration movie that I create for them about the technology, every README file, every design document, which is my equivalent of a syllabus, that's all there. And if somebody wants to take 3 weeks off of work and do the whole course in 3 weeks, they have that option. Okay, so that's the first thing, everything in place on day one. Also, it's only by putting everything in place on day one that I really get a firm grip of what should be in the early weeks of that course. Often when I'm developing a course, it's developing the 12th week that really informs how I have to develop the first week. Make sense? So I have to go back and redo what I did for the first week after I've done the 12th week and I see the holes in what I created. Now, a teacher can't really do that in a classroom, obviously, but online you have that option, and that's what your students deserve. I guess the most important thing here is you set your own bar. It's not about what your institution wants. It's not about what the higher education board wants. It's not about, for you elementary and secondary people, what your principal wants. It's not about what your department chair or your cooperating teacher wants. You're setting your own standard of excellence, because what your students deserve is always going to be more than what institutional forces require you to give them. You know, that's always going to be the low end. And this job is only fun when you start messing with that as your floor rather than as your ceiling. Okay? So everything together on day one. Related to that, you want a really high production standard. Just to give you an idea of this, and again, this is what you can do when you're online. You can't do this when you're in a face-to-face bricks and mortar classroom. Part of the production standard is when I do movies, I do lecture demonstration movies, my students see my screen, and I'm describing what I'm doing technically, because I'm teaching web design and electronic publishing and computer graphics. So I'm teaching them skills. When I finish making a movie, I go back over that movie and I typically cut out 30% of the total time. I'm cutting out the does and the uhs and the spaces and the coughs and any other sounds my body may have chosen to make in the course of the recording. All that goes, all right? And what I'm left with is something that's much better paced than I started with. Now that's important for me because I'm a 65-year-old guy and my mind doesn't work as quickly as it did when I was younger. And I have to stop and think some when I'm talking. I get all that thinking time out, and my movies are 15 years younger than I am because I can speed up the pace. Also, I can take out redundancies. I can see errors. It takes me about 20 hours of total time to produce 1 hour of movie that I use in a course, which means it takes me about a whole semester to do one course, right? Hundreds of hours to create one course. But remember, I'm working online. After I've created that course, I can deliver it summer, fall, and spring for about 3 years, at the end of which it gets obsolete. So I'm getting a lot of mileage out of my time. So that's my payback to the institution for not having to go in and actually teach a class in person. I am much better online than I would be in person because everything has been fine-tuned. Remember, the disadvantage is I have no immediate feedback. So that's the trade-off. I can fine-tune and I can polish and I can put in the extra time on the front end because the front end is the only thing I've got. I don't get any back end until the semester is over, and then I can get feedback. Of course, I get feedback along the way, but it's really not possible to redo movies in the middle of a semester. So higher energy. I never record unless I'm having a good day. If I'm having a bad day, I don't record. Okay? My students are entitled to my best. When I'm teaching in person, I can't always control that. There's going to be the day that, the plumbing broke down and 2 hours later I have to go teach class, and I'm not going to be in the best of moods like any other human being. But when I'm doing it online, they're entitled for me to be at the top of my game every single time I do it. And that's the beauty of online. I can make that choice. More inclusive design. Again, there's no immediate feedback that I can adjust to. So I really have to think through my target audience. And I have a very diverse target audience. I have people who are already engineers and they just want a master's degree for career purposes. I have retirees who are doing it for fun. I have people who are in alcohol rehab and they need something structured in their life and they decided a master's degree was it. So this is their structured therapy. I have teachers who are mostly interested in leaving the classroom and going into business. And I have a few teachers who want to stay in the classroom, just want to be better teachers. I have to consider all of those audiences when I do my planning. Because again, I have no idea what the mix of those people is going to be when I teach my course a year from now. It could be 50% of any one of those groups. So there's a lot of thinking through that has to happen before one word ever gets recorded. So those are the kinds of things that have to be there in an online teaching. Online teaching is a lot less forgiving than teaching in person. Teaching in person, you mess up, you get the immediate feedback, you know it, you fix it in real time, all good. Online, you got to get it right the first time. Now, as we go along here, if there are any comments that you guys are reading or Dr. To-be Ward is reading, if there are any comments that you'd like to shoot back at me from the students and have me respond to comments, I'll be happy to do that. I'm just looking at Dr. Ward's face right now. Right? Okay, so I'm not trying to, I don't multitask. I do one thing at a time, but feel free to interrupt me with anything interesting that people are typing in the background, and I'll be happy to move over to that, okay?
Okay, we have a chat going on, and so right now they're just kind of giving comments about things that are hitting home with them. So if there's anything that you have...
I'm seeing some things coming over the screen, but I'll let you manage that. You
Perfect.
can pick out the ones that you would like me to respond to.
Okay.
The one that I did see float by just a moment ago is, do I use a script? And the answer is, I typically don't have to use a script because I have my textbook, which is my procedures, my technical procedures, and mostly what I'm recording is that. So that's functioning as my script. I'm going through the 20 steps of whatever, and then I'm commenting on that along the way. What I'll do is I'll make marginal notes in my textbook on the things to watch out for each item, each bullet point in my procedure. Remember, I'm not involved in education. I'm involved in training, and there's a difference. I'm teaching people hard technical skills. When I do teach things like educational psychology courses, then I use a script, because then I'm educating, I'm not just training. I see a difference there.
Dr. Rose, I saw one other question come in that I saw some head nods when it came through about what tools do you use to create those screen capture videos, or whatever videos you create for your class? What tools do you use?
Yes. Well, first of all, once we're offline, I'd be happy to give you a link to all of my videos. I have them in a place, and you're welcome to share that link with your students, and they can go out and take a look at as many of the videos in my program as they want. The tool that I use the most is Camtasia, and I have found that it's very much a 20%, 80% tool. You can get by knowing just 20% of what Camtasia offers, but the other 80% is just awesome. And I always have a audio track, and I'm using all of the little glyphs and online motion things and online animations. And as I said, a minimum of 20 hours of my time for 1 hour of final product. Now, what I do that because I'm reusing that product semester after semester. If I was giving a one-off workshop, I would have a much lower production standard. But I really like Camtasia. The other product that I teach is Captivate. Captivate is an even larger time investment for every hour that you create. Captivate can do much more because it's an interactive tool. And what they see, what the student sees, will depend in part on what answers they give to questions. You can program it so that if they make certain mistakes, the show will automatically go to alternative material. So the way Captivate works best is if you're an HR department at Boeing and you're doing a show that's going to be seen by 20,000 people, then you put 100 hours of effort into 1 hour of show, and that's where Captivate really shines. For the normal stuff that professors do, or the kind of thing that I would expect secondary teachers might do, I would definitely suggest Camtasia. Any other points at this point? I'll go on to the next question. Okay, I'll go on to the next one and let me know if something else shows up. What advice would I give to first-time online instructors? And by the way, I'm paying no attention to time at all here. I figure we'll just get through whatever we get through. But if you want anything speeded up or slowed down, let me know. The first thing that I would suggest for an online and, again, asynchronous instructor, this is where you're throwing it out there and they're taking your module anytime they want. Create a persona. Now, what do I mean by a persona? A persona is who you are online. Because one of the disadvantages of online is the impersonality of it. People don't like taking courses from machines, and they don't want you to be a machine. They want you to be somebody, not nobody. So you have to create a persona. Just the way an opera star will wear more makeup on stage than she would wear in the street. You have to have more makeup online, figurative makeup, not literal makeup, You have to have more of a persona online than you would in a real classroom. In a real classroom, your persona can shine through. But online, you have to really project your persona. And Julie can tell you stories about how I projected my persona in the program she took. So what kind of persona would be best? Well, you have to be who you are, for one thing. But there are certain elements that you should really build into your online persona. And when you talk online, when you answer questions online and writing, these 4 elements really need to be there for you to be successful online. These 4 elements are not unique to me, and they're not original. They're 2,500 years old, and they come out of the Buddhist tradition. They're called the Brahma Viharas, or the abiding virtues. So if you ever get a chance to talk to another Buddhist other than me and you talk about the Brahma Viharas, they'll know just what you're talking about. But these are the 4 characteristics that you want to put forward in your persona as a starting place. The first is loving kindness. You want your audience to feel that there's nothing that you enjoy more than helping other people and seeing them learn, and that you're just in the right place at the right time and having all kinds of fun, okay? So loving kindness. You should just emanate loving kindness, the way a good elementary school teacher would do. I mean, you know how some 3rd grade teachers have that and others don't, right? Okay. The second one is compassion. You have to send the message that you really care about each individual's need. So teaching online is having 40 simultaneous relationships with people who you can't see. And that requires a lot of personal projection. It also requires calling them up on the phone every once in a while and making, real contact. I like to call my students at midterm time. I go down the list and call them all and ask them how they like the program. It freaks them out because they're not used to being called by professors. But it's part of my persona, okay? Compassion. The third one is sympathetic joy. Sympathetic joy is where you get off on their achievement, okay? You're really excited by how well they are doing, and you reinforce their success, maybe to a little bit more of a degree than you ordinarily would in a regular classroom. Well done becomes awesome, exclamation point, okay? Because they have to feel that your reason for being there is their success. That's true anyway, but you have to remind them of that. Okay, so that's sympathetic joy, your joy in their accomplishment. And then finally, the last part of your persona needs to be equanimity. That is, however it turns out, you're going to be okay with it. That doesn't mean that you have low standards, but that means that your standards have to take into account the situation that you're working in, which is online. And reality is, and I could get into a lot of trouble for saying this, I hope this recording doesn't go too far, but there is absolutely no control over quality when you're in an online environment, asynchronous. If somebody wants to get their boyfriend to do their homework, that can happen and you'll never know the difference. They've tried fingerprint measuring and retina scans and time tests, forget it. Online is training on the honor plan. It always has been and it always will be. And that's one of the things that you are going to have to be okay with. And you're going to have a wide variety of students. You're going to give it your best shot. You're going to try for excellence and try for achievement. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to be okay with the natural limitations of this environment. As much as you want to run down the computer wire and sit next to somebody and help them for 2 hours to get through a knotty problem, you can't do it. So you have to be okay with what you're working with. That's equanimity. So loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, that's the start of your persona. And then on top of that, you can be whoever you are built in. If you do that, you're a very long way to being a successful online teacher. Couple more items there. Get the mechanics under control in advance. Nobody wants to watch you mess around with the technology when you're supposed to be teaching. That's your job. Encourage complaints. I have my bevy of complainers. I call them my mind canaries, okay? I just came back from Trinidad, Colorado. There's a big statue of a canary in a cage on Main Street, because Trinidad is a coal mining town. And the canary would go down into the mine with the miner. And if there was methane gas, which you couldn't smell, the canary would drop dead from the gas, and then the miners knew they had to get out of the mine really quick, or they would suffocate in the gas before they knew anything about it. So I have my own mine canaries in every class, and I keep them very well rewarded. I let them know that I'm into having mine canaries, okay? These are the people who are going to call me up at 11 o'clock at night and tell me that something went wrong and I assigned the work for chapter 3, but I gave them the materials for chapter 2. You really need these people. They're precious. So let them know they're precious, and they will be your front person. They will be the person to keep you out of trouble, because they will find the problem before the rest of the class does. And by the time the rest of the class finds the problem, you solved it already. So those are my mind canaries. Keep your word. If you say you're going to have the papers graded by Thursday, grade them by Thursday. If you can't have them graded by Thursday, don't tell them you're going to have them graded by Thursday. Remember, they can't have that individual in-person relationship with you. It's all electronic, and they're going to be a little nervous about that. That's not as comfortable for people. So you really have to be rock solid plus on your side. Keep your commitments. And the other thing that might surprise you, but I would definitely recommend this, is when you're dealing with adult students, avoid collaborative structures like the plague. Now, you're probably familiar, if you're elementary, secondary teachers, of all the lovely Deweyan, touchy-feely stuff that we do in small groups and dividing up responsibility and group projects and all of that. That is not something that the online student typically does. And if you guys are doing that right now, well, I just got into trouble. Most education schools fall in love with that stuff. I can tell you that my students hate it, because they want to do their work at 1 o'clock in the morning in their buddy slippers and their skivvies. And they don't want to be having online meetings with other people. They also don't want their grade to be responsible, to be based on other people's work. For my technical people, that's not their thing. And the reason they like online is because they don't have to do group work. That's one of the reasons. So I steer totally clear of online. And when I've had my 10 years, of collaboration, when I've had my 10 years of evaluations, one of the things that I always hear from students is, thank God you didn't put us through any of those group projects. We hate them. We're glad that you hate them too. Okay. That, of course, is a personal preference. So that's the advice that I would give to, oh, one more thing, chat rooms. Chat rooms can be very valuable or they can be an enormous waste of time. The difference is how carefully you curate the chat room. If you're planning on using a chat room, plan on spending major hours grooming that chat room, making sure that the chat topics stay on focus. If you don't, the chat room will spin out of control. People will start talking about stuff that has nothing to do with the topic, and other people will start not going to the chat room because it's a waste of time, and it'll all devolve into mush. So either do it right or don't do it at all. In my case, since my students hate collaboration, I avoid chat rooms as well. My model is very much spoke and wheel, where I'm at the center and I have individual relationships going out in many directions. But remember also that I'm involved in training, not in education. If I was teaching a history course or a philosophy course, I would do it entirely differently, and I probably would have a certain amount of collaboration. Any other questions come in while I've been flapping my jaws here?
We have.
I was going to say, I think you got some agreement about students not liking group work. I saw a few things come in on the chat. We do actually have our students do collaborative group work, but as you said, because we're on the education side primarily, we want to show them what they'll be likely doing with their online and hybrid students in the K-12 level. So
and the truth is, yours is definitely the majority view, and mine is definitely the minority view within colleges of education, that's for sure.
And our students, they've made some good points that we don't necessarily have them meet together with their groups. They do collaborative documents and voice threads, so they're doing it at their own time, but together it comes in, and we don't grade them based on the group. They get their own individual grades as well. So
okay, fair enough. I knew that would get me into trouble.
No. It's a good perception to get the whole well-rounded conversation. So
if you ever become a trainer, remember I spent a lot of my years as a trainer in business, industry, government, nonprofit, higher education. There, if you tried to do collaboration, your audience would just walk out on you.
Is it just because of the sheer numbers of people that are going through the training, or just they're...
Because they want to do their work at their speed, concentrating on what's of interest to them. They're not thinking in terms of community. They're thinking in terms of self-aggrandizement. That's what your technical audience is going to be. Any other questions come in?
I don't think so.
Okay, I will move along here. What are the most frequent misbehaviors you've dealt with? Well, again, I'm teaching graduate students. I have had a certain amount of cheating. I've had one student in my 10 years who I caught them advertising their final project out on the internet. They offered $200 for anybody who'd be willing to do their project, and I caught them, and I threw them out of the program. But that's definitely an outlier. We don't run into that very often. I run into some people who I call hoopers, as opposed to drippers. A hooper is somebody who considers a master's degree just a matter of jumping through a bunch of hoops. And I'm supposed to be the lion tamer who's putting the hoops up for them to jump through. Those are hoopers. And they're looking at the master's degree very instrumentally. You know, they're saying to themselves, I have to pay for this, and I pay for it in money and in effort. So how little can I pay? And they think of effort as part of what they pay for the master's degree. So the danger with a hooper is you get a master's degree, but it doesn't mean anything because there's no real skills behind it. What I much prefer is drippers. Drippers are like plants in the garden that get a slow, steady drip, drip, drip of skill improvement and information over a course of 2 years. And those are the people who not only get a degree, but they have a dynamite portfolio of projects that they've thrown their heart into, and that's what they use in their interview to get their job in business, industry, government, nonprofit, higher education. But there's still plenty of hoopers out there, and it's really a shame because they're wasting their money. They just don't understand that a master's degree per se is essentially not worth the paper it's printed on. It is only of value if it represents marketable skills. And hiring officials have seen so many people with master's degrees that have no skills that they're not surprised and they're ready for that. So what I like to say is the master's degree might get you the interview, but only your skill set and your portfolio is going to get you the job. And that's why Hoopers is actually the biggest misbehavior. Then there's the grade inflation problem, and that seems to be even more when you have online. People assume that you as the instructor are not as interested as you would be if you met them in person. I'm not sure why that's true, but that goes along with a grading rubric that some people assume for online. And that grading rubric goes A is for average, B is below average, C is for comatose, and D is for dead. Okay? So there are people for online programs who really seem to think that just by showing up, they're entitled to an A. And I've noticed that much more in online than I have in face-to-face classes where they have to actually deal with you individually. And I don't think that helps anybody, because what about the person who got a real, genuine A? How do you differentiate between that person and the person who got the A is for average A, right? So I kind of have to make that grading system very clear early in the semester that I don't go along with that A is for average idea. And I've lost some students on that. I can tell you there are students who will go take a degree somewhere else if they feel that they're going to have to do more work to get their good grades than they thought. And that's okay with me. It's important to maintain the integrity of the system. Another question here is, what strategies would I use for reluctant students? I'm going to answer this for the elementary and secondary people because as a graduate school professor, I really don't have reluctant students for online. They're all into the idea of online. But remember, I used to teach elementary school, and I'm still somewhat involved in that world. The way that it's generally done is by trying to make things gamey, to have game-like elements. And we did this when I was developing stuff for elementary school. And all I can say about that approach is it can be very dangerous. And this is why. Because when you use a game-type approach to information transfer and to drilling practice, the gaminess of it is going to limit the number of repetitions and the number of feedback opportunities. Okay? The more gaminess you have, the more you're playing Jeopardy and messing with the Jeopardy part of it, the less your time is actually spent in the pure drill and practice. So you're gaining on the motivation side, but you're losing on the repetition side. And I've seen games that are so gamey that everybody has fun, but there's very little content. It's all payload. It's all rocket, and there's no payload. Okay? So be very careful of over-gaming in trying to entertain. Remember, school is never going to compete with television, and its job is not to compete with television, okay? There's a limit to the extent that we need to entertain. We have a more valuable job to do. And of course, there's a balance there that has to be met. A far better way to motivate at the elementary level with online is to provide very small incremental steps of success. So you're breaking up tasks into little tiny bits so that your students can succeed over and over again. In my day, we called this scaffolding, and the person who is the theorist on this was Vygotsky. But you want to provide them just enough help so they can make it to the next little bit of success if they try hard. Because ultimately, for motivation, nothing is going to succeed like success. So my view on that is pretty much be careful of the gaminess, but break it up into small parts, get them succeeding, and then they'll want to continue. Okay? I don't think I've ever talked quite so long without, even in my online classes, I'm usually moving graphics around and stuff like that. So feel free to jump in at any time. What are the foundational pieces for every online course? Okay, regardless of content. Here are my foundational pieces. Number one, a very clear definition of a target audience. You need to know where they are when they start. If you don't know where they are when they start, you're not going to know how to get them where you want to get them to. Okay? They have to start where they are, and you have to understand that. Sometimes that can be really shocking. I can tell you right now, I'm teaching something called Technical Writing Intensive. This is freshman comp for graduate students. I kid you not. I am teaching sentence structure, fragments, run-on sentences, agreement in tense, agreement in number, the use of the apostrophe, the use of the comma. I am teaching this to graduate students right now because somehow they missed it as undergraduates, and they hand in written work, which is at a 10th grade level. And some of the people who are in my technical writing intensive are teachers who are teaching English, okay? So you have to kind of start out with the realities you've got and then move to fill the gaps that you see. So target audience definition. Let me just throw in one more thing here. We're going to be losing each other pretty soon as our hour is up. But I've done a considerable amount of writing, about 6 or 7 articles, for a magazine called Campus Technology. And if you go out to campustechnology.com and you just look up my name, Richard Rose, you'll find a bunch of articles that I've written that cover the kind of topics we're talking about tonight. Okay, so if you do want a little bit more when we're done, that's where you can find it. Okay, other foundational pieces. Well-defined exit outcomes. You got to know what it is you're trying to get them to do. Most behavioral objectives that I see are garbage. They don't really describe where the students need to go in any meaningful way. And they're really tied to grade inflation, because when you haven't described a good exit outcome, it's very easy to tell people they've succeeded, right? And give them an A, and then they leave you alone, okay? But a good behavioral objective has got to have 3 parts. It's got to have the task, it's got to have the tools, and it's got to have the standard of excellence. So if I say, I want you to be able, at the end of my physical fitness course, I want you to be able to take a bicycle from Houston to Austin. I haven't included a performance standard. So that's a crummy behavioral objective, because anybody could take a bicycle from Houston to Austin in 25 days. You can walk it there, right? If I say, I want you to take a bicycle in 3 days, I've told you the tool and I've told you the standard, get it done 3 days, but I haven't told you the task. So you still don't know what it is you're supposed to do. If I say I want you to go from Houston to Austin by bicycle, I've left out the standard. So you still don't know what it is you're supposed to do. All 3 pieces have to be there. I want you to go from Houston to Austin on a bicycle, that's the tool, in 2 days, that's the standard. And it's only when you have all 3 that you have a real behavioral objective, a real exit outcome. So be real careful about that. Be particularly careful about objectives that sound like this. Students will increase their appreciation of the importance of technology in modern thought. Watch out for that one, because it doesn't tell you anything about what they're supposed to do. Okay, so we want a very well-defined delta between their entry point and their exit outcome. I always include weekly study guides. My weekly study guides include the objectives, the evaluation criteria, the activities they have to do for the week, and how I'm going to give additional information to supplement what's already in the movies. So every week they have this. It looks exactly the same in every one of my courses every week. Dr. Ward can tell you about these. You never have to figure out what this document is about because you've got it there all the time, okay? And it's always organized the same way. I do recorded lecture demonstrations, as I've mentioned. You get about 15 hours of these for every college course that you take. Most of my students tell me they watch them at least 3 times each. They watch them, and then they do their homework along with them, and then they watch them again later as review. So they get a lot of mileage out of those. Those are the ones that I put 20 hours into every hour that I give them. Well-defined projects with clear evaluation criteria. That's self-explanatory, but it needs to be there. How is the project going to be judged? Okay. That is particularly important today because we're living in the world of litigation and we're living in the world of student entitlement, where people are very quick to say, you didn't grade me fairly. And you have to protect yourself as an instructor by having very clear criteria of how you grade. So if anybody says, I should have gotten a B, you gave me a C, you can pull out the criteria and say, this is what I said you were going to do, this is what you didn't do. I don't happen to be a fan of rubrics because I think they add more confusion than they eliminate. I know that rubrics are very popular in departments of education. But if the rubric is phrased fuzzily, if each of the little boxes in the rubric contains an ambiguous statement that's not measurable, then your rubric is not helping you to tie down what an A is and what a B is, okay? Just keep that in mind. Extension opportunities. You want your top end to be able to run with the ball. If they really like a topic and they want to move forward, I always show them ways that they can take the next step, even if the next step is not part of the course. And finally, I always have a very flexible attitude toward evaluation opportunities. It's extremely common for me to have one of my students come to me and say, my boss just asked me to create a training module for the oil and gas business that we're doing. Can I use that training module for my final project instead of the one you wanted me to do? And my answer to that is always yes, provided your final project meets the same criteria and demonstrates the same skills that my project would have met and would have demonstrated. My experience with that is that the projects that I get when I open up the criteria in that way, when I open up the definition of the project while maintaining the criteria, the projects that I get are always much better than the ones that I would get if they just did the project that I assigned. Because now they're very much invested in the quality of what they're doing as a personal possession, not just a school assignment. So I'm always looking for opportunities to let people do what they want to do. Remember, it's adult education. I'm dealing with adults here. I want the locus of control to be in their hands as much as I possibly can. I want to be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. And to the extent that I can get myself out of the way and let them teach themselves the material, we're in much better shape. So those are the foundational pieces that I have for every course. Here's a quick one for you. Somebody asked which conferences I think are the best ones for instructional design and technology. There's the, can this be seen? Probably not. Okay. The Future of Educational Technology Conference. It used to be the Florida Educational Technology Conference. It's in January 23rd to 26th, 2018. FETC.org. That's a really good national conference. The other one is the International Society for Technology and Education. That's in San Antonio, June 25th to 28th. One piece of advice for attending conferences. The most important time you will spend is on the vendor floor. That's where the action is. You want to go to the vendors and have good questions, and you always want to ask to talk to the technical person because the salesperson won't know. Okay? The salespeople are very thinly trained in the booths, but there's always a technical person around who can really answer your questions. When I go to that type of conference, I spend at least half of my time on the vendor floor. And then the conference sessions where people give their little dog and pony show, that's nice, but it's less important. Okay, anything else coming in that somebody wants me to address?
They asked about, do you use surveys for feedback? Is that a feedback option for you?
Well, I'm a great believer in management by walking around. Okay, that's the best kind of management. And since you can't walk around online, you call people. I do guidance sessions with my students 3 times a year. And when I get them on the phone, I always ask them how the program is going, what's working, what's not working, that sort of thing. I make other opportunities to talk to them. Once a year, I do my annual student survey, okay? You can't take that kind of thing too seriously, and I'll tell you why. Because students, as a group, do not believe that their confidential survey form is confidential. They just flat out don't. And by the way, neither do the faculty when we're asked to evaluate our administrators. We don't believe it's confidential either. And when you don't believe it's confidential, then everything is going to skew positive. The one thing that you know for sure is that if anybody says anything negative on the survey, they must really, really mean it because they're taking the chance that the survey is not confidential. And the fact is, even if it were confidential, any instructor knows the writing style of their students. And when you read the comments, you pretty much know who made the comment anyway. So those are the reasons why I can't put too much weight on what I get back in survey results. I'm much more interested in what people tell me on the phone when I'm asking probing questions about how they're doing.
Do you find, I mean, I know what kind of student I was, but do you find that they're honest on the phone when they're talking directly to you about some of the negatives, or does it just depend on the student?
Normally, I have to do a good bit of work to establish a zone of safety. To the extent that I can succeed in doing that, I hear the truth. To the extent that I haven't succeeded with a given student, I'm not going to hear something that will be as reliable. But after years and years of doing this, and you know where you do your best is the people who've been in your program for a while, they already have a relationship with you. They're the people who can say, Dr. Rose, I love the program, but that last god-awful course, don't ever do that to people again. You know, that course just doesn't work, and here's why, you know. And that way, over time, averaging out everything you hear, if you create a zone of safety, you can get some pretty good information about what's going on. Anything else there, or should I move forward on your list?
We've got about 5 minutes left, so I've asked students if they have any additional questions. I don't see anything coming in, so if you want to touch on one more, then...
Okay. Is netiquette a problem? No, not really. How often do I change courses? Well, my courses are driven by changes in software version. So when Adobe changes their Dreamweaver product, I always have to scrap the entire course and start from zero-based planning. It almost never works out that I can patch a course. There's always too many interdependencies within a course. Yeah. What is a reasonable enrollment for online courses? It depends on the subject. In the technical writing intensive that I was telling you about, I can handle 10 students because each student needs about 2 hours of my time per week, okay? Because I make them a movie. I go through their written work and I make comments in Microsoft Word, and then I make a movie discussing my comments. So my comments are on the screen and I'm talking about them. So they need 2 hours of my time. As far as a regular technical course, I don't care how many students are in there because the bulk of my work is in the creation of the course. So about the only thing that I would say by way of summary to your students, I wish I could actually meet all your people out there. This is the best we can do, but it's been fun. The most important thing I can say is something that I said a little earlier, and I just want to emphasize it again. And that is, if teaching is going to be fun, either in the classroom or in a business environment where my students tend to end up, that only becomes true if you set your own standard. The philosopher Nietzsche talked about the Übermensch. And the Übermensch was the person who just didn't ride the tide, but decided where they wanted to go and carried the ball in that direction. And sometimes that will bring you into conflict with administrators and other people who just want you to go with the flow. And they have different goals than you do. Their goal might be not to get sued and to keep the lid on and to keep everybody happy 100% of the time. And if those are your goals, over time, it's kind of hard to stay interested in our profession. You really need to shoot for a higher star, and only you can decide what that star is. And that's why it's been fun for me. I started when I was 23, and now I'm 65, and I have no plans to retire. And I've made my share of enemies along the way, but mostly I get them to put up with me. Sometimes they even graduate and get PhDs and become teachers. Okay?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rose, for speaking to all of our students. And we've learned quite a bit from you in just 1 hour, so we appreciate your time.
Very much.
Great fun for me, and invite me back in a year or two. Maybe things will change.
Sounds good.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See everybody else later. It was good to see all of you guys.
I'll post this recording in our Blackboard module so that you guys can go back if you wanted some ideas, and I'll also post the notes that I took from the recording. So, see y'all.
Thank you, Julie. See y'all later.